What if I told you the biggest cover-up in history wasn't in a book? It's right in front of your eyes, because every time you've seen an Egyptian statue, a pharaoh, a queen, a god, the nose is gone, the lips are gone, the features that tell you who they were, gone. And yet the crowns are fine, the hieroglyphs are fine, the stone is fine. So tell me, how does time destroy black features but spare everything else? They say it's erosion. Nah, it's erasure. Because those faces look too familiar. Those kings and queens didn't look like the conquerors who came later. They looked like us. Broad noses, full lips, brown skin painted right onto the stone. And that terrified the people who came after them. So when invaders rolled in, Persians, Greeks, Romans, later Europeans, they didn't just steal Egypt's gold, they stole its identity. They took hammers to faces that proved civilization was built by Africans. They broke the proof so they could rewrite the story. This wasn't vandalism, it was policy. They wanted to bury a truth that would blow up their whole narrative, that Africa wasn't a place of poverty, but the birthplace of power.
Imagine being a child and you come across this great place in the history books with pyramids, gold, genius architecture that confuses engineers up to today. And then somewhere between the lines you're taught discreetly that your heritage would never come close to that place. The images look European. The documentaries avoid referring to it as African. The conversation always shifts to it either being Mediterranean or the Middle East. Now, if you're an African American child coming across such a message, what will you really absorb without anyone saying it out loud? That greatness happened everywhere else except where you actually come from. But here's the part they don't slow down and explain, that ancient Egypt was and is in Africa. It's on an African soil, along an African river, the Nile, and connected to Nubia, modern-day Sudan. So why did it become so important to separate Egypt from Africa? Because history shapes identity. Africa was always painted primitive. Therefore, if ancient Egypt is African, then it destroys the narrative that Africa had no great civilization going on. The pyramids, astronomy, advanced medicine, and the mathematics that influenced the world, all that collapses, whereby that narrative was used for centuries to justify slavery, colonization, and racism. If Egypt is separate from Africa, then the old colonial story survives, that level of greatness couldn't have come from black people. But if Egypt is identified to be part of the African story, then a different narrative arises. One that says that black history is ancient, black excellence is not new, and the African American identity did not start in chains in 1619. This isn't about rewriting history to feel good. It's about understanding why certain versions of history were promoted in the first place. Because when people are disconnected from greatness in the past, it becomes easier to limit what they believe is possible in the present. And that's why this conversation matters today, and not just in Africa. Because identity is power, and history shapes identity.
Why are the noses missing from all of the Egyptian statues, or a lot of them? And he asked the woman that, and she says, oh, it's because that's that's where it was the weakest part. Then no. The truth is because black Americans come from kings and queens and royalty. And they were brought here through slavery, had their names and history stolen from them. And people are literally like crying online hearing this. And this is kind of something I've kind of known, for a little bit, but it's interesting how when something hits you, it almost reminds me of Juneteenth, how people were free from slavery, but they didn't know. And it was like, once they got the word, was Juneteenth. And it almost feels like this is a liberation for Black Americans to realize that some people are saying the American dream they've been sold is BS. That your lineage, your roots are greatness of kings and queens and royalty, and Lord knows in Egypt, the technology that we have no idea about. That's Black culture. That's Black American culture. That's African culture. A lot of people are saying, I had no clue. They thought Africa was just poor and, you know, kids sitting around with flies on their, you know, belly and stuff. No, it's beautiful. It's prosperous. It's like Wakanda. But they've just been hiding it from you. So I think there's a beautiful day of awakening. Hey, it's like Juneteenth all over. Wishing everybody well.
So it's always the hair that tells the true story about the true ethnicity of our ancient people. But not only the hair tells the story, there's actually another huge piece here. You notice how the nose is missing on this statue? Seemingly chiseled out. Now what's interesting about this is a very common theme amongst many ancient statues and sculptures found around the world. Even on the Sphinx of Egypt, again, on all these ancient statues, the nose has seemingly been chiseled out. It's because the nose tells the real story, guys. It tells the real story. And when we see Greek statues like this, intact nose, no problem, white people, you know. And then you got the chiseled out nose here because it's telling the real story of our true ancestors. You think that it's just a coincidence that all of these ancient statues have the nose chiseled out? Well, let me tell you, it's most definitely not a coincidence, and it's just another way to cover up the real origins of humanity and our true history. Peace and love.
They have lied to us about ancient Egyptian history and religion, and I'm about to tell you now. So as you can see, they say ancient Egypt was 5,000 years ago. Why does this matter? So the reason why they tell us that ancient Egypt was 5,000 years ago is so that it can align with the Bible. A lot of the stories in the Bible are actually not true about ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egypt was actually over 65,000 years ago. But they would never want us to know the true power of the spirituality that lies within ancient Egyptian history. This is El Hakim, and basically he is indigenous to the actual ancient Egyptian area. He actually lives in those areas near the Sphinx, and he's been studying the ancient Egyptian history for as long as it's been. The tribe that he's a part of is actually also native to the land, and still are. His traditions, which are native to ancient Egyptian land, have taught him that ancient Egyptian is actually 65,000.
So you would say that those are not the real Egyptians, right?
Earlier when we're talking about like the movies that they made back in the Western society, about, like the Egyptians looking blonde and fair skin, and like, come on. Egyptians were either tanned skin or dark Nubians. We don't say African Americans in Egypt, by the way.
Right.
We say Africans or we say Nubians. Okay. So to us, you are a Nubian.
So that's why people keep calling me Nubian Queen.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you are Nubian to us. You are Nubia. So to the Nubians, we are Egyptians because we are the new Egyptians.
The new Egyptians.
The Nubians are the native Egyptians.
The ancient,
they were
right?
the ones who built ancient Egypt.
Wow.
Who built the pyramids, who built ancient Egypt civilization, who invented Egypt, as I would say, were the Nubians.
This is not a white Arab. This is not a white Arab civilization. This is an ancient African civilization. These are the people of Kemet. They are black people with curly hair. The Kemites were unanimously described by the Romans who saw them, the Greeks who saw them. This is a first-hand historical proof source, as black with curly hair. The European Egyptologists unanimously agreed that these were black Africans, but later changed the narrative to suit their colonial agenda. Why do you look like the way you look today? Because first the Assyrians invaded my ancestors, then the Greeks came, then the Romans, then the Arabs, then the Turks. All the greedy people wanted to claim this ancient African culture. But till this day, you people still don't understand what the Ankh means.
The ancient Egyptian civilization was a black civilization, and ancient Egyptians were black according to the Greek scholars and the Roman scholars. Ancient Egypt became white only in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And the scholar who is responsible for this is Seligman, the noted anthropologist from England, Seligman. White supremacy argues that blacks are inferior than white intellectually. They are subhuman and they are incapable of building a civilization. White supremacy had one dilemma until Seligman came. The dilemma was ancient Egypt was black according to the Greek and the Roman scholars. 10 of them said that, including Aristotle and Plato. 10 of them said that in writing. They had this dilemma: ancient Egyptian was black, so if blacks are inferior intellectually and are incapable of building a civilization, how come the ancient Egyptians built a civilization? Seligman found the solution for this dilemma. He came up with a theory called the Hamite theory. He separated the blacks who built a civilization in Egypt and Ethiopia from the rest of the black race, and he called them brown-skinned whites, or the Hamites. So Seligman saved white supremacy from this dilemma, and all the white scholars followed him from that time on. This was at the end of the 19th century. And since that time, white scholarship says that ancient Egypt is white.
Mustafa Hefni is currently working on his doctorate degree at Wayne State University. His dissertation topic is a content analysis of the treatment of ancient Egypt in world history textbooks. And just how far is this determined Egyptian willing to go to be classified black?
I want to carry my case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary.
Now, I found out that the Greeks, who were supposed to have been the founders of civilization because they were the first civilized white folks, but the Greeks got their civilization from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were black people, and the Greeks passed their civilization on to the Romans. They couldn't retain it, they lost it. They had a dark age in Europe for 500 years. And then another bunch of Africans, the Moors from North Africa, moved into Spain and started civilization all over again. So instead of Europe civilizing Africa, Africa has civilized Europe 2 times. They said that the earth was flat like a pancake out in the vastness of space, with the sun and the moon and all the stars going around it. The ancient Egyptians in the Pyramid Age 6,000 years ago knew that the world was round. They knew that it went around the sun in 365 and 1/4 days. They measured the circumference of the earth, and they calculated it so accurately until modern astronomers said their error was only 1 yard. Circumference of the earth is about 25,000 miles, and they calculated it with an error of about this, 1 yard. African history. The reason I'm talking to you about it is because it's not in the textbooks. And it's not in the textbooks because we don't write textbooks. We have other people write the textbooks, and they put that propaganda in there, and we are supposed to swallow it.
My beginning comment here, ancient Egypt was in Africa. We can't really doubt that, can we? It's in the continent. But more important, ancient Egypt was of Africa. And that, of course, is not the way the past 2 centuries of Western scholarship have generally presented its history. It's long past time, I would say, for all of us to discard a whole set of old notions about Egypt, notions rooted in really the self-serving racialist presumptions of 19th century Europeans, notions that only too often people even today simply assume. They've never thought to examine those ideas. They're back in the background, informing our minds even when we're not aware they are. The most recent, maybe we should say generations, the last 30 years or so, of scholars and scholarship on Nubia and Egypt are bringing together a whole new body, and maybe I should say whole new bodies of evidence, revealing the African rootedness of pre-dynastic and early dynastic Egyptian culture.
The Egyptians were Africans, and when you get depictions of Egyptians, they're always shown people with black skin, afro hair, sort of small noses, broad faces, full mouths. So they actually sort of have a caricature almost of what they see as an Egyptian. And the Greeks often confused Egypt with Ethiopia, so they'll quite often call the Egyptians Ethiopians.
If you read what the Greeks said, not what we think, but if you read what the Greeks said, they said they got everything from Egypt. They got all their knowledge from Egypt. Pythagoras spent 15 years in Egypt, and what did he have to do? He probably had to spend 5 years convincing them that he was worthy to get the knowledge that they had. Remember, knowledge was power. Knowledge was sacred. Knowledge was something you just didn't publish in the newspapers. Knowledge was guarded very closely because it was of tremendous value. You wouldn't give it to anybody. You would give it to somebody who was willing to shave his head and be a penitent for 5 years, and then you might start to tell him things. Okay? And the Greeks did this. Pythagoras did this. Other Greeks did this. And they said that they got all their knowledge from the Egyptians. Now, when did we come up with the idea that the Greeks created everything from scratch? Well, believe it or not, it happened in the 18th and 19th century. And it's an unfortunate fact of life that Romanticism, which has many great things about it, also has a dark side, which has to do with racism. And in the 18th and 19th century, it was decided that it was just not appropriate for all this knowledge to come from an African country. Where would that knowledge, if it survived to the time of the Roman Empire, where would it have been kept? Yes. In Alexandria, in the museum, the library at Alexandria. And what happened to the library? It was burned in a war. Okay? And at that point, what happened to those books that were burned? If they were written in living languages, there was a scholar someplace who had memorized the book and could just write it down again. But if it was in a dead language, like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, end of story. Can't be reconstructed.
But the CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro. Shammai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shammai have a Nubian feature, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shammai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always thought the ancient Egyptian elite were Mediterranean type, and in this sense, Shammai is representing the society of the frontier, in which different ethnic groups were mixed. At the end, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Shammai was Egyptian.
You know, I may have said a lot of things up here like, oh, I think we're these people or this, that, and the third, because we don't know our history. But when it comes to those Egyptians, I literally would throw in all of my money in a bet to say African Americans descended from the Egyptians. Because one, they needed us to build. And who are the only people everybody was fascinated with how they built? The Egyptians. Now, even if I'm not right, something happened to us. We lost a battle and somebody wiped the memory, or they took our identify. Somebody did something to where we can't self-identify ourselves anymore. And it was a war or something. Nobody can tell me otherwise. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I say what I say, but this one right here puts it on the cake. Apophis represents everything the Egyptians feared. darkness, oblivion, and the loss of one's identity. Who are the only motherfuckers in this world right now trying to figure out who they are? And what I'm starting to realize is all this religion really was the downfall of the Egyptians. Apophis is religion. He is darkness. Apophis is not only represented a threat to the deceased, but to the gods, Egypt, and the order of the cosmos. What were we talking about in that last video when I said this was a battle over the cosmos? And what's so crazy is Ra is considered to be like the god of all gods, but the Egyptian cosmos. And what's so crazy is Ra is considered to be like the god of all gods, but the Egyptians are considered to be the creator of life, everything they have. And what do African Americans do today? Create. And what's so crazy is down the Mississippi River and the Grand Canyon, there are so many Egyptian artifacts people are finding to show that Egyptians placed their stuff here to show this was a part of their land. And what's so crazy is they have a story about every other country and continent, but when it comes to America, it's a big ass question mark, just like the people inside of it. Whatever the case is, we have had to have some type of power. And when I say power, we had to be some threat for them to take what we identify as. And what's so crazy is it makes sense, because if everybody were to say, oh, we were the real Egyptians, then why the fuck does everybody have y'all artifacts hanging around their own homes? That's the realty. If the only reason they could do that is if the people didn't know that's their shit. You get what I'm trying to say? Now, y'all know how they said they had Upper Egypt and then they had Lower Egypt, and Seth was considered to be the king of foreign kingdoms, meaning anything outside of that was his kingdom. Now, if you look at Pangea, right, North America sits right on top in the left of Africa. I'm just saying, hey, like I said, nobody can ever tell me black people weren't here way before, but they're just trying to erase the history. Because it's so crazy. They only do it with us. Everybody only focuses on Americans for some odd reason. Even the Aboriginal Australians, they always seem to mess with them. But what's so crazy is about them, they migrated out of Africa, so they say, and they went to Eurasia. The same spot the Native Americans came from. Hey. Then went all the way down to Australia. But they're still trying to figure out how they got all the way down there. You can get there by boats, right? They say we got here by boat, so why are y'all questioning how they got from Eurasia to Australia? They could do it in a boat. Why can't they do it in a boat, but we were in a boat? That makes absolutely no sense. These people migrated into Europe, Russia, Asia, then came all the way down to Australia, but none of them stopped in North America. Right where they were right next to, none of them stopped. And quite honestly, I feel like Caribbeans are the Native Americans to here. They just shipped them out because it was too many of us. I can get very deep, but hey. And before I go, the rise of Christianity actually ended the Egyptians. Like I said before, all of this religion ended the Egyptians. And what was the main thing that was forced upon black slaves? Religion. Christianity, Muslim. If these people did not convert, they had their testicles cut off so they could not produce an offspring. Hello. Oh, magic came from Egypt as well, just so you all know. Now, I also didn't know Cain is actually the brother of Seth. But what's even more, I saw that, I don't know if Cain is Seth or what. I'm still looking that up. But what's so crazy is, right, Cain isn't even a person. It's a tribe. And this is why I've always wondered, how were they able to identify the people that they wanted to sell, or identify the people who were in certain tribes? They had tattoos, which I'm starting to see why they say that is a devilish act, because of where it comes from.
Just like the hair on our heads today. So if anybody tries to tell you that Egypt is a white civilization, you can point out this hair. So those of you who have your cameras, you want to make sure you take a good picture of it. But this is what Gaston Maspero, an Egyptologist, said about the hair in the Nile in Egypt. He says the hair was inclined to be wavy and even to curl into little ringlets, but without ever turning into the wool of the Negro. But take a look at that hair. It looks like wool, doesn't it? This is a picture of the hair that's on a figure that was found. So you can see what the person looks like and what the hair looks like. I don't know any European that could claim that hair. And so you know you have to have a serious comb to get through something like that. But you know what, brothers, by the way, some hair curlers even were found in Luxor, where we're going tomorrow, dating back over 3,000 years ago. So when you see those sisters with that head full of hair curlers, she's actually practicing an ancient African fashion tradition. Okay.